Here's RSA, which was developed by Ron Rivest, Adi Shamir, and Leonard Adelman. Provides digital signature. So when it comes to digital signatures, again, this is a lot of times referred to in the email world of providing, digital signatures is where that generally would come in. It's also mentioned a lot too in public key infrastructure. So when it comes to characteristics of public key infrastructure, it basically, the public key crypto systems distribute public keys within, in this case, digital signatures. And that's where that kind of comes in. So a lot of times it's referred to in that sense when we're talking about that. One thing too I wanted to mention too with the Diffie-Hellman, there are different groups of Diffie-Hellman that has different strengths that you can use for the key exchange process. And we have what's called the Diffie-Hellman Group 5, which runs at 1,536 bit key, which is important to remember. So it's 1536 bit key for the Diffie-Hellman Group 5, which again is determining the strength of the key used in the key exchange process. All right, awesome. Now with RSA, guess what? We also have a different level that we can use. Now in general, when it comes to looking at public key infrastructure, it's using generally RSA at 1024-bit strength. Okay, so it's going to be RSA at 1024-bit strengths in that case. Scenario there when it comes to using digital signatures and so forth is going to be coming into play when we talk about emails and such. Now another thing, as I mentioned before, when it comes to emails, which was PGP, right? So we would use PGP or pretty good privacy along with that. All right, the mathematics on this is definitely difficulty of factoring large numbers. So it uses a one-way function, which is mathematically easy to carry out in one direction, but basically impossible to carry out in the reverse. Now some other ones out there that we have is Algol and ECC. Now Algol provides digital signature, encryption, and key exchange services. It's based on calculating discrete logarithms in a finite field and based on Diffie-Hellman. Now your ECC provides digital signatures, key distributions, and encryption. It generally is more efficient than other algorithms because it's used in devices with limited processing power, like cell phones and wireless devices. And it does not require a longer key to provide higher protection. And of course here the public key cryptography advantages. Obviously here is that it's easily scaled. Right? Asymmetric only requires each user to have one pair of keys. So for 1,000 users, we have about 2,000 keys. It does not require out-of-band delivery of the key, meaning you don't have to take it on a floppy or something and take it off. Public key is also distributed and needs no protection. And again, we mentioned about having the certificates within your browser, which are, those are all public keys, right, that we basically mentioned there. It provides authentication, access control, confidentiality, as well as integrity, and on the email side of things, right, non-repudiation, where we can't deny having sent the message and the sender cannot deny receiving it, and so forth along with that. All right. Now, when it comes to the question is when to use which key, well, keep in mind, confidentiality is provided when the symmetric key is encrypted with the receiver's public key. So only the receiver can decrypt and extract the symmetric key by using his or her private key. Authenticity is also provided, so if something is encrypted with the sender's private key, only the sender should have access to his or her private key. And when it comes down to it, what we basically do is use a combination of the two. So if we look at the disadvantages, for instance, right, very slow compared to symmetric, up to 1,000 times slower, as we mentioned before, uses more complex mathematical formulas and so forth. Right, the size of the encrypted data is limited by the key strength, so it can only be used to encrypt smaller amounts of data, unlike our symmetric, which was used for larger amounts of data. Right, so here we can see the comparison of the two. Right, so the symmetric, one key shared between two or more entities. Each entity has a public-private key pair on the asymmetric side. For the key exchange, we have to do it out of band, generally, right, or else it might get compromised. Public key is safely distributed. Speed, algorithms is less complex, thus it's much faster. The algorithms, of course, on the asymmetric side are more complex and thus very slow. Number of keys grows as the number of users grow on the symmetric and does not grow uncontrollably on the asymmetric side. Remember we mentioned bulk encryption means encrypting files and communication paths. and here the asymmetric side is the key encryption and distribution. Security service provided here, symmetric, confidentiality, and on the asymmetric side, confidentiality, authentication, and non-repudiation. So you can imagine, even though we have the weaknesses here that each have and so forth, so what we can do is combine the two together, and we can have, basically we encrypt with our symmetric, our whole disk encryption, whatever, and then we use asymmetric to actually encrypt the symmetric key, and that would be one way of going about doing that. And as we mentioned before, PGP is one of those types of things that could be used for that, and so forth. So anytime we have things coming up that has to do with two keys, keep in mind that's always going to be mentioned as asymmetric and such with that. All right. Now we also have other ways that we can, for instance, protect smart cards and so forth. And basically we would use what's called the extensible authentication protocol for that when it comes to keeping things secured that way. As in, if we wanted to transfer maybe some certificates and so forth along with that, we would use that for that. Now, when we want to send, for instance, PGP messages and so forth, when it comes down to PGP, generally the piece of information that's needed from the recipient that the sender must have before encrypting it would be, of course, be the recipient's public key. Right? That would hopefully be standard there. Now, also, since we're still kind of mentioning here digital signatures, which next slide here, there it is. Providing authenticity and non-repudiation. So after the message is put through a hashing algorithm, the message digest value is encrypted with the sender's private key. The receiver validates the digital signature by decrypting it with the sender's public key and provides data integrity, authenticity, as well as non-repudiation. For messages to get through insecure channels and so forth, right, implemented by digital signatures and whatnot, when we use a digital signature, the message digest is encrypted using the sender's private key, which again allows us to keep it secure and provide that non-repudiation along with that. So it's overall pretty straightforward. All right, when it comes to U.S. government standards, we have the Digital Signature Standard, the DSS. We have the Secure Hashing Algorithm. Again, runs at 160-bit, right? It must also be used for message digest creation. DSA, RSA, and ECDSA asymmetric algorithms also can be used for digital signature creation, where ECDSA is the ecliptic curve digital signature algorithm. You don't need to memorize that portion, but you do definitely need to know about the SHA algorithm. All right, so when it comes to PKI and its components, keep in mind the public key infrastructure allows us to use certificate authorities, also known as CAs. We have certificate authority registration authorities, certificate repositories, and the certificate revocation systems as well that helps us with those. Let's take a peek at some of these. So if we look at the registration authority, this will basically go around and accept registration requests from users. It validates users' identities and also passes the requests to the certificate authority. And it cannot create certifications. Now, the certificate authority itself creates digital certificates. It binds the user's identity to a public key and then maintains that certificate during its lifetime. Now, with that in mind, too, it also is able to go through what's called the certificate chaining process. And what it does, it checks these certificates to see what the chaining is, so in what order. So it's like a tree structure. So if I'll show you guys here, let's say I go to Internet Explorer. Okay, let's say I go to Internet Explorer and I want to go to, let's say we go to Google. Now what I can do here, as you notice here, I have the lock, I have the HTTPS. Now this lock will generally tell me what the certificate is. So I can look at the certificate and we look at the certificate certification path. And you notice here we have, this is what we call certificate chaining. Right? So we can see that it's going from Google to this Google Internet Authority and then to GeoTrust. And what it does is it goes through the certificate chaining process to see if the certificate is actually valid. If not, it will check, of course, the certificate revocation list, the CRL, also known as the CRIL, and that's where all of your certificates that have been compromised or expired and so forth are, and it will check that as well and make sure that, again, that everything is in order and so forth. And that's where that kind of comes into play. All right. Now, another thing we've already mentioned too is PGP, right? Pretty good privacy. Again, used for email standard. So it's a free email client that provides security. It was developed by Phil Zimmerman. Uses passphrases instead of passwords, and the key generation and private key protection it provides, as well as web of trust instead of a hierarchy of certificate authorities tickets there, right? Like we kind of just saw in the certificate chaining process. And also, users decides how much they will trust each other, and again, user has complete control over that. Now, there's other secure protocols that we can use. Of course, we can use the secure hypertext transfer protocol, which protects each message, not communication channel. It's older and less used technology. However, we do have HTTPS, which is HTTP on top of SSL, your secure socket layer. It provides secure communication channel, 128-bit encryption generally, right? And all messages and other data is also protected. SSL, originally developed by Netscape, requires your public key infrastructure to be able to use. Again, it uses asymmetric scenarios, right? So public-private keys and such. Server authenticates to the client, and optionally, client can then authenticate to the server. Client creates session keys and sends it over to the server. It works also at the transport layer. So if we break it down a little bit, you can see here the SSL connection setup. The server first sends the client certificate. The client checks to see if the signing certificate authority is the trusted list in the browser. The client computes hash of the certificate and compares the message digest of the certificate by decrypting using the certificate authority's private key, as in the CA signed the certificate. Client then checks the validity dates in the certificate. It will also check the URL in the certificate compared to the URL it's communicating with, and the client extracts then the server's public key from the certificate. The client also then creates a session key symmetrically, so this will basically be the same key for both the client and the server. The client then encrypts the session key with the server's public key and then sends it over. Isn't it amazing how we use symmetric and asymmetric together there? Right? And the server then decrypts it using the private. We have SSH, which we mentioned before, runs on port 22. It allows for secure access to remote systems. It can also run different protocols and applications through an SSH tunnel. It should be used instead of Telnet in our utilities, because as we mentioned before, our utilities and Telnet run in clear text. Server and client generate their own private public key pairs, and many times uses the Diffie-Hellman for its key agreement protocol. Like many other protocols, must carry out a handshake process, and then agreed upon parameters are then set up in the SSH tunnel. The other thing too, as we mentioned before, is your IPsec. Again, IPsec is going to be used a lot of times for your VPNs, your virtual private networks. It's developed because IPv4 has no security mechanisms. It is, however, integrated into IPv6. It sets up secure channel between computers instead of applications. And the application secure channel are usually provided here with SSL. We have network layer security. It can provide host-to-host, host-to-subnet, and subnet-to-subnet connection. Now, generally going to be two modes of operations. But before we get to those modes, which is going to be transport modes and tunnel mode, is looking at the suite of protocols that's within IPsec. We have what's called the authentication header protocol, which basically provides data integrity and system authentication. And the integrity is through the ICV, the data origin through the MAC, and the replay protection through sequence numbers. Main thing here is you need to remember that it's AH, the authentication header protocol. It basically will encrypt the data, but not the IP header information. Okay. Now, the encapsulated security payload, ESP, provides data integrity, system authentication, and confidentiality. Because what it actually does, it goes out there and will actually encrypt the header and the message as an and the data, and with that keep it secure, and it's mainly going to be used in tunnel mode. So here we see the IPsec modes of operation. Again, we have transport mode and tunnel mode, and transport mode offers payload protection. Protects headers up to the network layer. However, if you wanted things to be very secure, you would go through tunnel mode, which protects the whole packet, which includes payloads in all headers such as the network layer header, and it also creates a new IP header. So on the forensic side of things, this would be a better way to go, of not being able to detect it on the forensic side. However, if tunnel mode is used, we cannot detect it. If transport mode is used, however, we may be able to identify on the forensic side the header information, such as where it came from and where it's going to, which could be an indicator of breaking the case on the forensics world. Now, when it comes to attacks on the crypto system, now these you also have to remember. So the next few ones here, we're going to also end it with these next two slides. And you might want to remember these because you may get some questions in regards to these different types of attacks. Okay, so we have what's called the ciphertext only attack. The attacker only has the ciphertext to work from. The goal of all these attacks is, of course, to reverse the encryption process and to uncover encryption keys for all of these attacks. We have what's called the chosen plaintext attack. This is where the attacker can choose what plaintext is encrypted by the victim system. The known plaintext attack, which the attacker has obtained ciphertext and plaintext, and we have what's called the chosen ciphertext attack, where the attacker can choose the ciphertext that will be decrypted by the victim system. More attacks, we have the replay attacks, which the attacker obtains a set of credentials and then sends them to an authentication service, captures usernames, passwords, tokens, and tickets. The timestamps and sequence numbers are also used to protect against this type of attack, and we have man-in-the-middle attack, which of course the attacker injects itself between two users, reads the messages going back and forth, or even manipulates the messages thereof. Sequence numbers here, of course, also digital signatures are going to be used here also to countermeasure this type of attack and so forth. Now, there's one more attack I want to mention, and then we have the rubber hose attack. And the rubber hose attack very simply is coercing someone to give you the data that you need. You know, it's a kind of cryptographic attack that's used to basically coerce someone. Literally take that rubber hose and beat them with it until they tell you. So there you've got it. There you have it. There you are. So what I would recommend again is as you guys have gone through and gals have gone through this video course here, again, it's not very long as we saw, but it covered all of the main ideas and the main things we needed to know to have you guys go through, in addition with your studies that you've done so far and whatnot, to go through and then actually do a good job on passing the CEH version 8 exam. I hope it was informational. Hope it was a little fun here as well. And keep in mind that, as with practice makes perfect, just continue on with your studies and take that test, get it out of the way. And again, thanks for taking the time to check us out. And feel free, if you wanted to, shoot an email and say, hey, pass the exam. And the video course helped out with that as well. So we would be honored to find out how you guys are doing with that. But keep in mind, it was mainly focused on getting to that point where we can then go through and successfully take the exam with the information provided here. Of course, reinforcing some of the knowledge you've already had and possibly learning some new things as well. So good luck on the exam out there. And again, thank you very much for checking this out. And we hope to have you check out some other Mile 2 courses down the road. Until then, Randy Kohler signing out.